The book is straightforwardly about Freud's life, on the one hand. It's also less straightforwardly about all Freud's doubts about biography and about how Freud's doubts about biography shed light on the nature of psychoanalysis. I did know that I didn't want to and couldn't write a so-called conventional biography, but I also didn't want to write a pretentiously avant-garde biography, as it were. It seemed an absurd idea. So I wanted to see what I would be able to make of this biographical project in the light of the fact that I, like Freud, didn't quite understand what a biography really was. So I wanted to find out what a biography might be in the doing of it. Psychoanalysis comes out of two things. One is Freud's, as it were, verbal intercourse with his patients, and then the writing, the representation as writing, what he makes of it through the writing. And it seems to me Freud is a writer who is, in the best sense, making it up as he goes along. Through the initial constraints of science that he consents to, I think he uses these as a container, if you like, for a much wilder imagination. I try and say this in the book, that I think Freud needs science to set limits to his artistry, so to speak. That is to say, I think he's a visionary person who wants to be a more down-to-earth person. He's Don Quixote, want to be Sancho Panza. The reason this is a Jewish life is because Freud's Jewishness is somewhere at the centre of his sense of himself and consequently of the history of psychoanalysis. Freud is always fearful that psychoanalysis will be a Jewish science, i.e. dismissed as a Jewish science. Well, Freud and all the early people involved in it were all Jews. There's a reason for this, and the reason for this is psychoanalysis was an attempt to, I think, continue the tradition of Judaism in a secular form. That's to say, it had all the preoccupations, I think, of Judaic culture without God, without the religious ritual. But of course, at the centre of it, there is a ritual, the ritual of psychoanalytic treatment, which is very specific. A certain number of times a week, for a certain amount of time, sitting in a certain position with a certain person. Well, there are two reasons. One was that when I got to a certain point in the book, I found myself speculating about what Freud might have done, or rather what psychoanalysis might have become, rather than what Freud might have done posthumously, if he died at 50. And when I'd written that, which is actually in the book, I felt I'd finished the book I wanted to write. And that was a good experience, but also a troubling one, because of course there was a long way to go. As I reflected upon this and wondering whether I was going to abide by my conviction, I felt that to go on with the book would have been a self-betrayal in the sense that, I don't want to be too grandiose about this, but in the sense that I didn't want to do thumbnail sketches of Jung, Ferenczi, all these other remarkable people that were involved. I also didn't want to be too fast and loose in the brevity of a short biography about the kind of ideas that Freud was going to develop. But the main reason it ended there was because I felt I'd finished the book I wanted to write then.